I thought I would just start us off to think through and, in a sense, then go through a series of proposals why we continue to have a supply and demand mismatch. And this is not related to the vaccines being new, but actually has to do with the underlying data and information infrastructure we have to invest, procure, and deliver vaccines across the globe. So in a sense, these issues are endemic to any vaccine rollout, not only COVID-19, but obviously the exacerbation, the timeliness, the speed in which they were not only discovered but manufactured has even unfortunately exacerbated the decentralization of the infrastructure that we're within today. And I think of the proposals that have been discussed at the tables with multilaterals, for example, bilaterals, and within countries really fit in three buckets. First, in discovery and production, second, in procurement, and third, in delivery. And so I'll share with you a few of what I think these proposals have come to bear, and then I'm hoping we'll spend most of the time in the second part of the hour discussing many of these. So in the discovery and production phase, as many of you are aware, there's been this notion of adopting a TRIPS waiver to remove the critical intellectual property barriers in order to scale up vaccine production across the globe. Number two is to incentivize our pharmaceutical companies to voluntarily license the COVID-19 vaccine patents, either to manufacture in a low and middle income country directly or through a multilateral mechanism, such as the mRNA Vaccine Technology Transfer Hub. The third is to impose a federal waiver on intellectual property related to COVID-19 vaccines within the US federal jurisdiction. Number four, we find the idea of financing a technology buyout where the US federal government offers these companies a lump sum payment in exchange for the COVID-19 vaccine IP. The fifth is investing, as we know, in vaccine manufacturing infrastructure. And we've seen some really creative multilateral partnerships, for example, between the Republic of Senegal and the EU. The sixth is actually supporting efforts to evaluate and implement dose stretching strategies. And remember the experience that we've seen from the UK as well as India, and where and when those should be adopted. Quite telling on a day as of today, for example, when third doses boosters will be made available to all adults in the United States of America. And the last is really, how do we harmonize regulatory processes? So during a pandemic, the local trial requirements for vaccines actually are quite stringent, and which of these should be waived in the midst of an emergency? Now to move to the second bucket, procurement. So what are the proposals on the table to gain some efficiency in procurement? First, many have suggested the countries should fulfill their dose sharing pledges immediately and ensure that COVAX and the African Union African Vaccine Acquisition Trust actually has the doses that have been pledged. The second, that Gavi and CEPI should be able to leverage their mechanism of advanced purchase agreements and provide concession loans to encourage vaccine manufacturers to expand their capacity immediately. The third is to develop other private financing solutions, for example, a bond, which would proceed and could be channeled to vaccine procurement. And then there's also the need for bilateral partnerships, particularly with certain high-risk countries, to complement the ongoing multilateral efforts on the table. And then the third bucket, which is where I spend most of my time, is really thinking through the nuts and bolts of how do you deliver a vaccine in the midst of a pandemic? How do you not disrupt routine immunization programs? What are the services you need to upgrade the infrastructure? So the flow of information, the flow of the product, and the flow of the financing. And I'll just leave kind of my opening remarks here that what we see and the imbalances that we continue to see across these countries are truly related to the infrastructure of global systems, the flow of the information, the difficulty for countries to predict the demand that they will need and where to locate the product. And how do we think about, not only in the midst of the COVID vaccine, obviously, but how these recommendations actually, in a sense, help us upgrade the conditions that led to this crisis in the first place?